What would you think if I told you that you could paint this entire house with just 2 brushes? That's right, you as a DIY homeowner can paint your entire house with just 2 brushes and of course some ladders that most DIYs would have at home anyway. Now look, all you cowboys that are going to say that it's faster to do it with an airless, okay, take off your Captain Obvious hat. We all know that. This is about showing people how to paint their house with a brush and ladders. Everything that a DIY homeowner would have at home. Now of course there are faster ways, not just spraying. I would implore you to look at a video that I also have for painting the exact same kind of house, but also incorporating a roller along with the brush. It will speed up your process by at least 50%, if not 5 times faster. Okay, I just did this one just to show you you can do it with a brush. Everything about this paint job is basic. It's water-based paint, although very, very top quality, high-end paint. It's easy to use because it's water-based, easy to clean up your brushes because it's water-based. One of the first things I might say to do as a DIY is take off your fly screens. You're going to be dropping paint on your fly screen. Once you get drips of paint on your fly screen, good luck on getting that out. Some of you will be relying on masking tape. There's not a problem with that. There's no issue with that. But I would encourage you to try and learn how to cut in. And this brush here is an XL, Purdy XL 2.5 inch. It's a straight one. I would say to get the angled one. Also, there's one with that's even a bit thinner than that, which is the Nilox range. I would probably recommend that. It's probably going to be a little bit easier for you guys. And when cutting in, there's not a lot of cutting in. What you see here is what there was on this house. But for cutting in, you want a good brush. If you buy a cheap brush, I can't even use a cheap brush trying to cut in, and I've been doing it for 40 years. If nothing else, buy yourself a good brush for cutting in. And one more thing, when it comes to working off of ladders, your safety is paramount. Don't do stupid things on a ladder. If there's going to be an accident, usually there's a ladder involved. I've got a video on that, and not just showing you how to climb up and down a ladder. I'm going to show you lots of neat little tricks. That will be in the description below. I'm Rick. This is Invincible Painting Basic. Let me show you how I painted this house. For me being a professional, I'm going to start right here at the back side of the house, right at the fence, and I'll start here and I'll work my way all the way around the house at the top. I'll be sanding the eaves, I'll be getting rid of the cobwebs, I'll be wiping down the fascia and the gutters as I also go around. And what I'll also be doing is when I'm sanding and cleaning up, I'll be bringing down the siding as far as I can on this ladder. These sophites have a low sheen acrylic on them, which means that if I use the same paint, I can get by with one coat. And it's going to last for, gosh, 10 or 20 years at least. It doesn't get rain, it doesn't get the elements, it doesn't get the sunshine. But it's a bit rough, like I showed you on the walls. There's cobwebs everywhere, so that what we do, and by hand, I just give it a slight rub. Well, I still got my sandpaper. I do the same thing with the siding. And it's just a light rub. It's not, you don't have to get stuck into it. My duster brush, get rid of the cobwebs. I forgot I normally have a mask on. The fascia and the gutters are color bond, metal, and we're not painting them. They're dirty, they've got cobwebs everywhere, so I Usually this kind of stuff I throw in for free, but as a homeowner, you want to look nice when the whole thing is done. So, with a wet rag, I'll just give it a wipe. Huge difference. All the dirt and everything is off of it. And as a painter, if you do that and throw that in for your client, they're going to love you and they're going to spread your name around. Now I always try to, if there's high bits, and on this house there's 2 high bits, there's 2 gable ends. And as you can see, I've only brought the siding down with the sanding and the preparation down to the top of the ladder. So what I'll do, because I can come down even a bit further, back up, and I'll bring that down to just above the window. Quick dust, and you can't see it on the film there, but there's little spiders that make their home up against that crack. So in 5 minutes, I've brought this whole section down to here. The next step is just to go a little bit further. Now these fascias and gutters are so dirty, probably every now and again I'll want to rinse out my rag. Your sandpaper is only going to last so long. As long as I'm up on the ladder, I get everything I can reach. And you don't have to worry where you've been or where you haven't been, because you can actually see. You probably can't see it on the film, the camera there, but I can see where I've sanded. It stands out, so you know where you have been and you know where you haven't been. So as big as a task as saying, I'm going to sand the whole house down, okay, that sounds huge, like a huge job. Like, oh my God, not going to do that. But you can see in about as little as 10 minutes, I've brought this whole gable down to pretty much just so I can get to the rest of it from standing up. I'll have this entire house sanded today. And before I get off this ladder, ladders are probably the most dangerous things on a job site. If people are going to break their legs or fall off of something, it's going to be a ladder. So take your time, be safe. If you haven't seen my video on how to use ladders and all the little tricks that there is, there's a lot to know about ladders. Doesn't seem like it. Jump, climb up, climb down. Watch my video. I'll have a card up above here, or it'll also be in the description below. Okay, now here every now and again you'll see a crack like this. Some of you may have the crack completely around the house, but what we do here, because we're professionals, is we fill that crack with Nomergaps or latex caulking. And it really is as simple as that. So I've done all that in probably an hour and a half. So you can see doesn't take, so you can see it doesn't take forever. It's just labor, and you have to get up to the places to get there. So you need ladders and stuff like that. So look, I'm going to finish off the front and on the side, and then we're going to start the painting. Now, some of you are going to find little holes in the place. And instead of using a patch where you put the patch in with a knife and let it dry and you sand it back, I'm going to show you a little trick, and it's going to go really, really fast. What I do is I put the nozzle as flat as I can on the hole, and I try to squeeze a bit of Nomergap or caulking in there until I start seeing it come out just like that. And that's how fast that is. And the reason why you squeeze it till it starts popping out is that way you know that you're actually getting some material inside the hole rather than not just on the surface. Sanding down this house, even though it seems like a monstrous job and maybe overwhelming, it's not really that bad. Now I'm nearly finished, and I've probably gone around this whole house in probably 5 or 6 hours. You'll notice that all these nails, they're sitting proud of the actual surface, every single one of them, and they're galvanized nails. You want to sand your wall down, but when I come around close to these, I try to avoid them, maybe just ever so slightly hitting them, because if you go through the paint and in through the galvanized, it doesn't take a lot. And I've been on houses where almost every single one of these have rust on them. It's because they've been sanded too much. So just be aware, if you've got a house just exactly like this, and there's thousands and millions of them, just take it a little bit easy when you come to these proud nails. And just that little bit of sand, you'll notice the difference right away. It's nice and smooth. Down here where I haven't, it's all kind of bumpy and a bit, gravelly, sandpapery. It's rough. With the entire house prepped, we're now ready to start the painting. And the very first thing we're going to start painting, in this case, we've got the eave. The soffit is different. It's offset with a white color, and the body color is going to be different. Now, in some places, the body color and the eave is the same color, which in effect is actually faster to do. But in our case, we've got to go around and paint the entire soffits all the way around, and I'll do it in one go. Now, for those of you that kind of rely on tape for cutting in, as you can see, there's a light here. You'll have maybe different kinds of lights. There's also two cameras on the corners of the house, one on here, one on the other side. You're going to want to tape those off. As you can see here, there's paint all over it. If there's no paint on your hardware and lights and things, there's no sense in getting paint on it, or even more paint. So tape them off, or learn how to cut in around them. I almost forgot. Take note here, when I'm painting along here, I mean, even I drip the odd occasional bit of paint. DIYs are going to drip a lot more paint. So look, I've got a drop on the floor here and on the little fence there. But look, so when I'm painting along there, drip doesn't really matter. When you're painting past windows, just keep an eye out. Always keep looking at the window, so if there is some paint on there, you've got a wet rag and you've got a bucket of water, you can clean it up. I'm going to start right here on the eaves, exactly where I started when I started the prep. You notice the little wire that I put on the bucket, and it's just a wire off of an old paint tin, which means I can leave this bucket here, and I've got two hands. I've got one hand for the brush and one hand to hang on to stuff, which is a huge help. I'm going to cut in the entire eaves, go all the way around the house. And I know what people are thinking, oh, what about the wet edge, wet edge? If you use really good paint, when I go around to roll this, I'm going to roll in as close as I can without touching the house. And I'm also going to roll in just as close as I can without hitting this metal fascia. Now, a lot of you, this will be a wooden fascia, and you can actually paint that back side edge and just slop it on there, because when you cut in with your trim, it's going to be perfect. In my case, I have to cut this in perfect because it's a metal edge. Also take notice, I'm not worried about slopping any paint on the wall color, because I know that when I come back in, I'm painting this little board here so it matches with the rest of the house. The previous painters did it this way because it was easier. But if you look at the corner, something looks not right. Because it isn't right, they took a shortcut. And because it's not covering, I'll have to do this one little strip twice, and it's the same on the other side. And I'm not worried about slopping over there, because this gets 2 coats of paint. It's a color change, so the first coat won't probably cover this color, so it's going to get 2 coats anyway because it's outside. So it's just like that all the way around the house. I'll do this, I don't know, an hour and a half. In this case, I want to tell you, go through exactly what I'm doing to cut in the eaves. And again, I don't need any apparatus to actually hold on to the can, because the top of the ladder is very flat. But what I'm actually doing, and remember I explained to you, I've got a metal fascia. I can't paint the back of that, so I've got to cut that in. Okay, come on in, buddy. So I'm just going to cut that in and I'm either getting so close to it, but not quite touching it. It looks so easy, doesn't it? Now on this side, we've got this little bit that extends down past the eave. And the first thing I do is I slop in paint on this bottom edge. Okay, coming really tight now. Again, I don't worry about slopping paint on the body color. I'll do that. And again, it's just that same process all the way around the house. So that's it. I've just finished cutting it all in. Unfortunate for me, I've got to do this one more coat because it was the same. I've got to do this one little bit with an extra coat because it was the color of the body, so it's dark. It's not really looking that good. So I'll do the other end again. I'll come back, I'll do that again, and then we're ready to roll. All up, that took me about 2.5 hours. You can easily take off at least a half an hour for setting up the camera. So you can see if you get stuck into it, it doesn't take too long. It's going to take you guys a little bit longer. We're ready to start rolling. You're going to want an extension pole, probably no more than a 1/4 inch nap. Now I use lamb's wool, always have all my life. They're still, as far as I'm concerned, nothing surpasses lamb's wool. You probably pay the highest price for lamb's wool, but there's so many reasons why I use that. One is it holds so much paint. And number two, and probably more concerning for DIYs, is there's so little splatter compared to synthetic rollers. And if you don't know anything about splattering, you're going to find out if you're using a very cheap roller. The extension poles come in all different kinds of sizes. This is probably one that I probably use the most, especially for walls and ceilings, and it probably doubles in length. It's adjustable. You can get fairly long. Aluminium, they're lightweight, they're very good. And when it comes to painting, I paint out of a paint bucket using a grid. It wasn't supposed to go like that way. So using a grid, that works so much better than the little trays that most DIYs buy. They're not practical. They're easy to spill paint. You're constantly topping them up with paint because they don't hold a lot of paint. So I use a bucket. There are some better trays. Obviously they cost more. I think I got some links to those. For all the brushes and the tools and equipment that I use, I've got links down below that you can go to and get the same sort of stuff that I've got. If not, they'll be the same quality as what we've got here. When it does come to tools and equipment for painting, you want good equipment. Just make sure you take good care of it. I've got plenty of videos on how to take care of brushes and rollers. I'll show you. I've even got a video that shows you how to clean up a roller in less than 1 minute, and it will be perfectly spotless. So rolling this out isn't going to take me more than probably 15 minutes, an hour and 15 because I'm filming, but it goes so fast, particularly when you've got the right equipment. When it first comes to loading your roller for the first time, just watch my video on how to load a roller. Super fast, super quick, super easy. And also I give you some hints and tricks on why you keep a certain amount of paint in your roller. But let's get going. It's the first dip. So I'm just loading the roller for the first time. And as always, I've got everything covered that doesn't need paint. And when you're going to be rolling, you will get paint splatter. So just make sure you cover everything that you don't want paint on. Okay, the first dip will never go very far. Again, it's a 1/4 inch nap. You don't want a huge long nap on a roller for this kind of a job. Now I'm rolling as close as I can without touching the fascia, the back of the fascia, and also as close as I can get to the wall. So I'm missing it maybe 1/2 inch, like here in Australia it'd be 1 centimeter. Even though you probably cut out 3, 4, 5, 6 inches, you still want to roll in as close as you can. Take your time, take it slow and easy so that you don't get that roller going in places you don't want it to go. Okay, so for half this gable end, less than 5 minutes. I'll go around this whole house in less than 20 minutes. But it's for DIYs, this gable end isn't near as high as the other gable end. So I'm going to show you a little trick. You may or may not want to do it, so I'm going to show you 2 different ways. This is the high end on this house. Now as the eaves slope upwards, I'm actually on a downslope on this driveway. So the tallest point is right there. Now I can probably just reach this, but the further this gets away from your hands, the less control you have on the roller, especially up there, and especially when you have to make things tight. So I'm going to show you 2 ways. This is the way I would do it, but I don't really recommend it. Again, nice and tight or close to where you've cut in. Now a lot of people, if you're afraid of ladders, and there's a lot, nothing wrong with that, probably a healthy way to be for your own safety. But look, this is the way I would do it, or what I would recommend for a DIY. Take off your extension pole. Remember that wire I showed you on when you're cutting in? Same wire, just off the 4-liter tin of paint. Put that on your big tin of paint. Walk up your ladder. Hook it on. And then just do it by hand. You've got a lot more control. And I think as a DIY, you're going to find this a lot easier. Just take your time and stay safe. Okay, and done. I can tell you, at 61, that's getting a little bit hard for me. But look, if you're finding it too difficult to control the roller with an extension pole, then look, do as I showed you on the other side and just do the whole thing by hand without the extension pole. I think you're going to find it a lot easier. It'll take a bit longer, but it's going to be easier. We've got to clean out the roller. What you don't realize is that there's so much paint in that roller. There's a lot of paint in that roller that should come out, and the easiest way to do that is with a putty knife. or you can even use, I could get away with that, a straight stick, but we've got a little putty knife. I'll do a digital zoom on this, and you can see what I'm doing. I'm just actually just taking the knife and kind of scraping through the roller, and you can see that paint, all that paint coming out of the roller. It's amazing how much a Lambswool roller holds. Once you've taken all of the paint off the roller, take your roller and put it into a bucket of water. Make sure that the surface of the water is above the roller. We're going to let that sit overnight. As a professional painter, I very rarely have that opportunity to actually let it soak. But if you can let that soak overnight, or even a little bit longer, it's going to be so much easier and faster to clean. Put that in the water. Run your roller up and down it a few times because it's got water on it. Get the excess water off that grid. And you have all the excess paint left over in your bucket. Just use your, try to make this, we'll make it so you guys can see what's going on here. Just use your brush to scrape out all the excess paint. I now just take that over to a hose, give it a good rinse out. And with the brush and the roller, this is the same again. This is going to go into a bucket of water. Make sure the water is above the bristles. Lean it up straight in the can. I usually put a rag on it so that it stays straight rather than falling over, because if it falls over, then you're going to have a nice bend in your brush, and it's hard to fix. It's fixable, but it's hard to fix. So I put it in the bucket of water. You're ready to start painting the body of the house. I want to run through you how I use my brush. Now, most of you you'll dip your brush in, and then you'll scrape most of that paint right off, and you start painting. And it's probably the worst thing that you can do. What you really want to do is you want to dip your brush in so it looks like you got all that paint and it's coming off, and all you got to do is tap the sides and it doesn't drip anymore. You dip it in, tap, 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 you tip it upside down and straight onto the wall. And depending on if you want a lot of paint or a little paint, if you want a little bit of paint, you just touch the surface. Still tap, you just got a tiny little bit of paint. If you want a lot of paint on there, if you want a lot of paint in there, just dip it like that, tap, tap. And that tap takes off all that excess paint so it doesn't drip. You haven't got a long time, but it stops that drip for the first few seconds. I'm working out of an old paint tin. When I fill up my paint tin, I've got at least to a third to maybe a half. I've always got that wire on there. I can hang it onto a rung on the step ladder. So I work out of a tin. But let me show you what this looks like in action. I'm going to dip, tap. Notice dip, upside down, dip. First thing you want to do, don't worry about how the paint looks when you're first putting it on. 2 or 3 dips, just throw that paint on there. Then long, even strokes. And keep going. Not even a minute. So try to get out of this habit. Scrape, scrape. Scrape, scrape. There's no paint on there. It's a really, really bad habit to get into is when you're scraping all that paint off. I'm probably doing 5 times more dips if I'm going to just scrape it all back off. And that's what you're doing. You're just loading your brush and you're just scraping it right back off. Dip, tap, tap. And when you get really good, it's just a shake. And one more thing I forgot to tell you, when you first pour in that can of paint, put a little bit of water because you want to make it, you want to give it to what we call workability. And most paints are too thick when they first come out of the can. And if you don't believe me, just work straight out of the can and go for maybe 10-15 minutes and then put just a little splash of water on there, give it a stir, and I guarantee you'll see a huge difference in how you paint. Okay, I know what you're thinking. By looking at that, you're asking yourself, he's not worried about keeping a wet edge. And no, I'm not worried about keeping a wet edge. Not on the first coat anyway. It's the first coat, and technically it doesn't matter how you put it on. It doesn't matter if there's a couple of overlaps. It's the second coat where you really have to be careful. And when it comes time to put the second coat on, I'm going to show you how using this ladder and this one brush, how we can keep a wet edge and get a really nice professional finish. Now it's places like this, it's going to be pretty difficult for a DIY to cut all this in, particularly because it's round, and trying to get right back in there. A lot of times you've got the square gutters, a lot easier. But what I do sometimes, what I recommend you doing is maybe getting a little piece of cardboard, and you can slide that in behind there. Okay, there's already paint all up over this bit of metal, and some people just think, oh, it's already got paint on it, so why worry? Personally, I think it's a bad attitude, particularly if you are a professional painter. What I can say is I don't do it, and I recommend that you don't do it. Don't get any more paint on there. Then it's just a matter, doesn't matter. You can put that brush right in there, all the way around, at the bottom. When you pull that out, presto. We're now ready to put on the second and final coat. For those of you that are using a really high quality flat acrylic, you probably won't have to worry about keeping a wet edge, but in this particular case it's a low sheen, so there's a sheen on the paint, and almost any paint that's got sheen on it, if you don't keep a wet edge, you're going to see the difference. As I'm painting this entire house with a brush only, just to show you it can be done, it is so much faster by utilizing a roller to help put on the paint just at a much, much faster rate. It's a little bit more difficult, especially if you've never done any painting whatsoever. But look, I've got that completely covered in another video. Click on the card above, or if you don't want to leave the video just yet, there will be a link in the description below. So how do we go about keeping a wet edge on such a large area? It's not as hard as you might think. And some would start thinking, well, you just start on the right and go to the left, but the board that's starting right at the top is basically just a long wide triangle. So you could start right there. So you'd start right in the middle. But because I know that I can go at least 2 or 3 boards down and keep a wet edge. It's really cold this morning. It's going to take a long time for the paint to dry. There's no wind. So I'm just going to come down 2 boards. So in order to do that, you can see that I'm not going to be able to reach all the way over to where that second board finishes over there. So I'm going to start on the left-hand side, right where that second board finishes, right about there. And the ladder is actually below that. So there's nothing holding us back now but fear. Now I know that that's going to that being wet is going to give me enough time to go down, move my ladder, climb back up, and continue onwards. And it's up to you to figure out how many boards you can do at a time. If you're using the roller, you can probably do an extra board or 2 boards. It really depends on the day, the temperature, if there's wind or not. And if you're not quite sure, just get started, because you're going to learn really fast on just how many boards you can do at a time. From doing those 2, I probably could have done even a 3rd one, and still maybe even a 4th one, but then you got to remember that you got to reach places. So the next 2 boards down go from almost to that end to that end. And what you got to make sure though is drop your ladder a little bit lower, so you can't have the ends of the ladder on the boards that you're going to paint. It always has to be below. So for those next 2 boards, I'll move this ladder at least three times, maybe 4 times. And I know it's a lot of up and down on the ladder. This isn't too bad. It's not that high. When you start working off of 24 and 40-foot ladders, you might want to think of a different process. And remember, you as a DIY, you would have taken your screen off. Now as a DIY, make sure you take off your screen so you don't get drip any paint. Also, you might put some tape just across the top there so it catches any drips. You can see from my wet edge, the next probably place I want to put my ladder is probably almost where the middle of that window is. So that's not going to work, because you got to paint that strip, and you don't want, I don't know if you can see that, but can you see that little spot there? That's the last time where I was actually painting around where the ladder was leaning up against the wall. So you don't want that on your second coat. So this is all I do. I make sure that I get as close as I can to the window, and I reach over at least to halfway. If you're uncomfortable reaching out so far, you're going to have to either figure out a different way or find somebody that's going to do it for you that's maybe used to working on ladders. Because if you are uncomfortable on ladders, you're the ones that are most likely going to be injured. I basically grew up on ladders, so probably could use a ladder as a dance partner. I've got my bucket on the other side of the ladder simply because it's right up against the window. So I'd have more of a chance of getting paint on the window if my bucket was on the other side. It's a little bit more cumbersome this way, but it's a little bit safer from paint drips. I've brought that all the way down where I know I can reach that with a 6-foot ladder. As you can see here, I can get from here down by just standing on the ground very easily. Because I've got a natural break right here at the window, I'll paint all these right down to the bottom of the window here. On the other side, I won't do that. I'll go back to my system of painting 1, 2, or 3 boards all the way across, so I maintain my wet edge. Okay, it's gonna take you a bit longer, but to bring that down from all the ladder work, that's 35-40 minutes for me. Give yourself a couple of hours, but the faster you can work when you're trying to keep a wet edge, the better off you're going to be. And sometimes you really just have to do 1 board at a time. Can you imagine doing this if the sun was out on a summer's day? There's always 2 sides to a house that usually always in the shade, so maybe try and work during the day when it's in the shade. One more little bit of information, a little trick really, is that throughout the day your paint will get thicker and thicker. And periodically what I do is I just splash a little bit of water in there, stir it up with my brush, and I keep on going. Because you'll notice that it starts getting harder and harder to use that paintbrush. It's almost as if the paint gets sticky and gooey, which I know from experience is happening right now. And it's more because it's to make it easier to work with your brush. You're not thinning out the paint. You're not trying to stretch the paint out. That's how I'm slapping that paint on. I just throw it on there as fast as I can. So you can imagine how much faster it would be with a roller. Eliminates all of this dipping. Because as you're going along with the paintbrush, no matter how you put your paintbrush, where you stop, you look at the paint, you can't see that. And there's just drag marks and brush marks all over the place. So you just lay that out nice and smooth, nice easy touch. So just like that, I've got the hardest side done and it's still morning. And take note of that. I've always been the type that I'll get the hardest bits done first. Because once the hard stuff is done, it's like coasting downhill. You take a lot of DIYs, they'll just do what they can reach. They'll do the bottom first. Okay, it's not the way you paint. Get a system, and it's usually from top down. So that's this side done. We've kept a nice wet edge. There won't be any overlaps anywhere on the side of this house. And for the other three sides, it's exactly the same thing. But it's going to be a little bit easier because it's not as high as this. Just quickly give it stand back from your wall, analyze it, and see how you're going to have to tackle it to keep a wet edge. It's not that difficult. Give it a little bit of thought. Take your time. Stay safe on the ladders. I'm going to go finish the other three sides. When it comes to cutting in your trim, look, this is probably going to be the hardest thing that DIYs have to contend with. Cutting in isn't super simple, and a lot of you are going to find yourselves relying on tape for cutting in, and that's okay. There's not a problem with that. It takes a lot longer. You're not going to get good at cutting in. This is a Purdy brush. It's in the XL range, and the different ranges have different thicknesses, and it's right here in this bit here. For the DIY, I would say you're going to find it a little bit easier with the Nylox range, and probably one that's got a bit of an angle. DIY seem to find that a lot easier. When it comes to cutting in, the better brush that you have, the easier you're going to find for cutting in. If you're using a really cheap and nasty brush, they're almost impossible to use for cutting in. So I highly recommend buy a decent brush when it comes to cutting in. And to me, you can't go wrong if you use Purdy. There's other really good, decent brand brushes out there. Me personally, I've just been a Purdy man all my life.